My name is Justin Tooley. I'm the director for the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. This is our webinar over the FY25 Disaster Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Path 3 Industry Transformation Path. This is a technical assistance webinar for serious applicants for this particular competition that is focusing on some strategic insights about putting together your overarching narrative. Hey guys, if you're online, please mute so we don't get a lot of background noise. Also, we're going to record this webinar and share it back with you. So don't think you have to like keep notes or anything like that. And we will also share the slides back with you at the end of the presentation. So this is your opportunity to sort of sit back and relax and take it in. I'm also joined by Grace Klein, who works on my team. She will be leading some of the webinar as well. If you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. Me and Grace are going to do our best to get to them in the best way we can. If you have some of the questions, we'll probably cover in this. Some of them might be covered in another technical assistance session. We will tell you which one of those are. It's also helpful to pose questions about what's on your mind, because that will help us figure out what we need to provide in some frequently asked questions on our website. So no question too big, no question too small. Put them in the chat. And then we'll also pause throughout the webinar for people to come off mute, and maybe we'll answer a couple questions live. So remember, stay on mute unless you're coming off to ask a question. Yeah, really appreciate everybody joining today. I think a lot of our great EDRs in the regional offices that you've been working with for probably a good number of months now are on the phone too. So appreciate their help in helping us put together this webinar to better support you. Also just appreciate the work that you are doing in your respective regions. I know that, adverse events in your communities have really impacted all of you and your neighbors and loved ones. And so I really appreciate the time that you're putting in, the work that you're doing to help things improve in your respective community. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Objectives and agenda. So today we are going to talk about the importance of the overarching narrative and what reviewers are looking for in it. The second thing we are going to do is give you tips for thinking about sharpening your story in the overarching narrative. So one thing that I will say is that if you are not familiar with our Notice of Funding opportunity, and this is not the webinar where we're going to go section by section, the contents that is covered in webinars online. This is sort of like the 202, 302 version. So this is a little bit more what is included in the NOFO, plus how are we thinking about and what are we looking for. So we're going to have a lot of tips for you along the way for you to think about as you use these last few weeks to pull your applications together. I'm going to talk a little bit of more context about today's webinar, talk a little bit about application structure. We'll talk about the overarching narrative and why we use it. And then we'll go into some of the specific sections, and then we'll have a little housekeeping at the end so you know what to expect. So remember, this funding opportunity is not just about rebuilding post-disaster. It's about transforming local economies after the disaster. Okay, so our industry transformation path is looking for applicants to put together a portfolio of interconnected component projects that will work together to transform the economy in their respective region. Remember, our NOFO has 3 pathways. This webinar is only about the industry transformation pathway. Again, we are looking for proposals that present a portfolio of 3 to 5 projects that work together. Collectively, those are in the range of $20 million to $50 million altogether. Remember, the application deadline is Tuesday, March 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Earlier, I mentioned that there's a lot of recorded webinars on our website. That's the top row. So webinars 1 through 5, where we walk through the NOFO and the individual paths. This webinar is sort of the 202 300 level version of webinar 4. So we're going to go deeper into the overarching narrative today. It's Tuesday at 1 p.m. We're going to come back and talk more. We're going to talk deeply about governance. And then in webinar 8, in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about using Edge to apply to submit your application to us. Again, we will record all of these webinars. We'll share the decks with you on our website. So let's move on to application structure. So an overall application is going to have many components. These are all listed. Everything that's required in the application is listed in the NOFO. So we are going to spend today's focus talking about the overarching narrative, which is written by the coalition lead. It is not a great practice to write that in isolation of all the other partners that might be leading individual projects. But that overarching narrative is a key part of the application. It's a required part of the application that is intended to bring your application together. Your total application will also include required forms that are spelled out in the NOFO for each of your component projects. You'll also have match documentation and commitment. Make sure you know that you look at the NOFO very closely about all of these different.
Hey, Justin, can I say a couple words about this slide?
Yep.
Hopefully you all understand this, but just want to make it really clear that the overarching narrative and everything else you see on the top row there, so match documentation, commitment letters, that is one application in Edge. Component project applications are separate. We tie them together on the back end. So if you are a coalition lead and you're going to be a component project lead, you're going to submit 2 different applications. Only the component project applications have funding and a budget attached to them. So if you're a coalition lead and you're expecting to get funding, you have to be included in the budget of your component project, or technically you could be a sub of someone else's component project.
Right. There's a lot of questions about submission. We're going to come back to this. We're going to put FAQs out about this, and we're also going to have a specific submission application. So I know it's a lot of paperwork, and I know it's a little bit different, sort of applying to us for a portfolio of interconnected projects. But today, we are working on the overarching narrative. All right. So what exactly is the overarching narrative, and why do we do it? So the overarching narrative is a strategic storytelling document. So remember, you have all of these different compliance forms for the individual component projects in your portfolio. The overarching narrative is to bring it all together. It includes both of your near-term actions and your long-term transformational strategy as a coalition. So this is your opportunity to tell us, how will EDA funding fundamentally accelerate the economic trajectory of your region and lead to transformation? It's also the opportunity for you to tell us just how all of your proposed projects work together to deliver on that transformative strategy, or those transformative outcomes. Okay, so the big takeaway here is this is your opportunity to tell us a cohesive story. We're going to talk a lot about story today. We're going to have, I think, hopefully a helpful graphic to help you think about that. But this is your opportunity to sort of tell us, like, why you're doing what you're doing and where does it lead. A few overarching narrative do's and don'ts. So do. You're going to tell us a cohesive story. I'm going to give you a slide in just a second that gives you a picture of what that looks like. This is your opportunity to be clear and specific. It is also your opportunity to you are going to have to speak to multiple readers. They may not have been to your region. They might not necessarily have a lot of expertise in the specific industry that you're talking about. So it's going to be important that your your application is accessible to multiple readers. So one of the strategies that I tell people when we're working with applicants is, can you explain it at the kitchen table? If you are like me, I get very connected to my written products, right? And sometimes, like, what makes sense in my head doesn't necessarily make sense to the people on my team or my boss or the public. Uh, this is your opportunity to use these last few weeks to share this with people that might not be working on the application closely every single day, and making sure that they understand what you're doing. Okay. Don't use jargon. Um, don't describe why your region is special based on sort of atmosphere or subjective anecdotes. Base it in assets, evidence, and analysis. Our communities are important. They are very different. Um, but make sure that you are telling us a story that is based in the data and the evidence. Lastly, big piece here. I know that this is a competitive competition, and sometimes we try to impress people with big outcomes. This is not your opportunity to overpromise, because what you put in your application, we're going to expect you to deliver. So make sure that, sort of the objectives and the outcomes that you hit are things that are achievable and realistic. So big tip, share your application, share it across your coalition, make sure that it's clear. I think maybe somebody should mute. I think I'm hearing a little music. That's exciting. Okay, thanks. Next slide is our evaluation criteria. This is in the notice of funding opportunity. So again, your application is going to be reviewed by 3 different readers. Your application is going to be reviewed comprehensively. That's why this overarching narrative is very, very important. This is how your application will be scored. So 2/3 of your score is going to be about your articulating your disaster recovery and community need, how clear that is. Second is your project strategy. So we'll talk about your who, what, where, when, why of your projects and how are they connected. The third piece of that 2/3 of your total score is feasibility. How likely is it to succeed? We're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3 of these things today. The fourth is your coalition strength. So who is at the table? What do they bring to the table? And how well do you govern yourself if we were to make this investment? We're going to cover item 4 in our webinar next week when we talk about coalitions and governance. 1/3 of your total score is also about performance goals and measures of success. We're going to talk about the 5th one today. So 1, 2, 3, and 5, we're going to talk about much closer today. 4 next week. This slide. Again, your overarching narrative includes a lot of information. You should make sure that you are responding to what we spelled out in the NOFO. But I think, like, sometimes that's a lot of information and it's not always clear how all of that works together, right? This slide is intended to help you sort of think about the through line of your story. So the first thing we're going to the first thing is the disaster impacts. We want an assessment of where your community was economically before the disaster and where you are post-disaster. Then we're going to ask you, okay, what industry will support this transformation and why? And why does it make sense for that region? The third piece is your coalition. Who's involved? What do they bring to the table? How are you going to govern yourselves? That's the third piece. So you've got, this is what happened. This is the industry that we propose to transform. This is the team that's going to bring it together. Portfolio of projects is the how. Through these connected projects that cost this much, that will be done on this timeline, that include these activities that all work together. This is our solution to the problem. Investments in policy commitment. So this is like what's sort of on the table that's going to help accentuate and support and make our investment go farther. And then lastly, why should the government make this investment? Is it reasonable? Is it going to make the impact? Is it transformative? but also just as important is it feasible? Can you pull it off? All right, I will pause there. I cannot see the box. So Grace, if there's a couple questions, if there's any questions in the box that we should answer, or maybe if somebody wants to raise their hand and come off mute, this might be a good place to pause for just a second.
Yep, we're getting good questions in the chat, answering most of them. And if we haven't answered yours, we haven't forgotten about it. We'll just need to answer it in a posted FAQ on the disaster website. But if anyone else has questions, feel free to come off mute or put yours in the chat.
I don't see.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I know that one, I think it's section 5 or 6, maybe both, require tables to be part of the formal submission, and therefore consuming some of the 10-page allotment. Any guidance on the table size to effectively communicate what we need to, while also not pulling away from the limited length?
Sure. No, it should be legible. You should stay within the page limit. I strongly encourage you to use those tables to make sure that you're covering the information.
And then do you recommend for those tables also having a narrative component to them, or just let the tables speak for themselves?
Let the table. Good question. Let the table speak for itself. I don't think there's any reason for you to like tell me in text, but then also like you could say, you will find our outcomes here. Look at the table below. But I would not necessarily, spend that precious real estate on being redundant.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Other ones? Good. So I'm seeing lots of chat or lots of questions in the chat that might be more for FAQs or things that we're going to cover in another webinar. While Grace is talking, I'll take a look at these and see if we can answer some more of these today. All right, Grace, I'm going to go to you. And there you
go. Great. Okay, so Justin level set for us and set the context. Now let's dive into the actual overarching narrative. I do want to acknowledge that I forget who just asked the question, but you're far from the only person who feels that we're not giving you enough space. So whatever struggle you're having, fitting your whole story into 10 pages, you're far from the only one. You may need to get creative with, shortening words, things like that. But for the table itself, you're welcome to use bullets. If you go back one more, thanks. So Justin, the sections of the overarching narrative, one more back.
Oh, sorry.
Great. There's 8 sections. Today, we're going to go over 6 of them. And then section 3, coalition and stakeholders, that's next week's webinar. It's going to be an important one. So if you can't make it, do watch the recording online. And we're also going to cover investment and policy commitments. So everything about the who to your coalition is next time. Okay, next slide. Executive summary. This is the first part of the overarching narrative. This is where you'll state your coalition's overall vision for projects, activities, and outcomes. Per the NOFO, you've got to include your project title. So give your whole effort, your whole portfolio of projects a title. Summarize your overarching plan and approach. Summarize your goals with specificity. Tell us exactly where this is going to happen, which may be slightly different than the disaster eligible area. It may be just a subset of that. And then finally, tell us who's in your coalition and what they're each doing. Next slide. Awesome. Second section of the overarching narrative is the disaster impact. So here you're going to tell us about your region's economic conditions prior to the disaster, as well as describing the disaster and the associated disruptions. We've listed several example metrics, these are right from the NOFO, that you can use to describe where you were before and then where you were afterwards. We do want you to use fact-based evidence, so we do want you to use some metrics. You do not have to use all of these. Don't overwhelm the reader with all numbers, but at the same time, don't simply rely on anecdotes. And here's the most important takeaway for you for this section. Strong applications will center on forward-looking transformation, not solely on past damage. You have all already qualified, or presumably you've already qualified for this NOFO. So we know that you've suffered damage. Be specific about what happened, but then tell us how can you move forward so that you're in a better place than you were before. Yep. Justin, anything to add here?
No, I think you're good.
Great. Okay, so again, we're skipping section 3 of the narrative. That's for next time. And we're moving on to where you tell us specifically about your proposed projects. So again, per the NOFO, the first part of this section is that you're identifying the economic sector or sectors that your projects will support. We only ask you in this section of the NOFO to just identify the sector or sectors. But implicit to your whole application is that there has to be logic to why you're choosing that sector. And we're going to look for that throughout their application. Here are some of the places where we'll look for that. So the sector you choose should utilize your region's existing assets, right? It shouldn't come out of nowhere. You should already have some basis for that industry or sector in your region. One place we'll look for that is in section 7, which we haven't covered yet, on alignment with your local or regional strategic vision. The sector you choose should have some buy-in from the private sector. So it should be leveraging some private investment. This is something that de-risks EDA's potential investment. One place we'll look for that is in section 3, where you tell us about who you're bringing to the table, and in section 6, where you tell us about what they're offering. We'll also look for the fact that you chose a sector that can create widespread opportunity for job seekers and can help create new firms or accelerate firm growth. One place we'll look for that is in section 5, which is the outputs and outcomes table under the impact section. And so we'll look to see, okay, like if you are asking us, EDA, to invest money in this sector, show us who's going to benefit from that and how. We'll want to see job growth metrics. We'll want to see some sort of firm-related growth metrics. And then finally, are you choosing a sector that will enable you to compete in domestic and global markets? Again, we'll be looking for associated metrics in that table. Justin noted this before, there's a lot of parts to this application, but this is one way that all these parts should be speaking to each other. So in this section 4, you're telling us about the specific sector you've chosen. Every part of your entire application should speak to why this is a smart sector for your region to invest in and for EDA to be a partner in investing in that sector for you. Okay, more on section 4. So for these proposed projects, often reviewers ask themselves, okay, I kind of get the why, but I don't really get the what, or I get the who, but I don't get the where. You want to address all these specificities. Tell us who is responsible for delivering the activities and who uses the outputs. What specifically are you doing? What inputs do you need to do those activities? And then what are the results? What are the end products or end services that will result from that? Where will the project take place? If you have a specific site, name the specific site. When will you meet not just long-term milestones, but when will you meet interim milestones so that you know you're making progress on time? And then finally, which we'll talk about soon, how will the projects connect to each other? So clearly the takeaway here is be specific so reviewers truly understand how EDA's money will be used. We are, like every government bureau tries to be, good purveyors of taxpayer dollars. And so we want to know where are those dollars specifically going.
So one thing, like just from the perspective of a reviewer, this is something that I hear a lot when we're talking about applications is like who is going to use whatever, whatever project you're building, right? Is like, are they present? Like we want to see that when you offer this service that it's going to be utilized. And sometimes like we talk about like, well, are the people there, or is this a if we build it, they will come type element? Like we're looking for, hey, very clearly who is going to come and utilize this specific project. Okay. So when we talk about who uses the outputs, that's really important as well. All right.
Great. Okay, interconnections between projects. So look, if you just needed several individual projects funded, you would go for path 2. The whole purpose of path 3 is that your portfolio of projects speak to each other. They should be coordinated so that they're creating an impact greater than the sum of their parts. Here we've got some examples of how your projects can be coordinated. I'll go over a few of them. Number 1, pooled assets and resources. So maybe you are building a manufacturing space under your first project, and it's for firms to use and grow. Well, maybe you also are funding a workforce project, and then you're going to use some of those manufacturing equipment to train those workers. So that would be an example of EDA's dollar going further because there's 2 projects involved. Another input-output linkages and handoffs. Maybe you've got, again, like a project that is a manufacturing test bed where small firms can help create their first minimum viable product for something. And then the output of that, which is, okay, you have a firm that now has a minimum viable product, goes on to your second project where they have space to have offices and grow as a firm. Last one, cross promotion. That is, okay, well, we're paying for some, let's say, convening costs, conference convening marketing costs under one project. Well, we're going to let our other projects also participate in that and benefit from those dollars that are in the budget only going to one, but they're really all working together. One reason why you may really want to pay attention to this slide is that this kind of reinforcement across projects strengthens the case for EDA to fund your full portfolio because it's harder to divide up your projects into singularity ones. So don't sleep on this slide. Justin, anything to add?
No, I think you did it. I think sometimes like this is a place where clarity is king, and be explicit. Don't assume that your reader just figures it out themselves. Like it's obvious to you, you've got to explicitly tell them. And I think again, it's important to think about like how do these projects work together to deliver transformation.
Great. Okay. Another important section, industry transformation project impacts. So this is the table we were talking about before. We're being really clear with you. We're like, this is what your table should look like. You simply have to fill it in. And let's quickly go over each section of the table. So first, baseline. So if you think back earlier in the presentation to when we were talking about disaster impacts, and you tell us where were you before the disaster, and then where were you after. This is the continuation of that. So this baseline is, where are you after that disaster impact? Essentially, where are you now? And you're going to put that in metrics form. And again, feel free to use bullets. Then second column, coalition outputs. What are going to be the immediate outputs from the activities that EDA is helping fund? Don't tell us economic growth, tell us X number of new jobs. From there, it's intermediate outcomes. What measurable results demonstrate early progress? Maybe the jobs lead to higher incomes. So that's the kind of thing where you're making one jump from the specific output to the real benefit for individuals and firms. From there, it's longer term outcomes. Maybe you're starting to talk about your region's competitiveness on the global scale. And finally, overarching goals. So what are the broader goals that those 5 to 10 year outcomes contribute to? Here we've defined outputs and outcomes. So I know there's some confusion there. It's not always a hard definition of what defines an output versus what defines an outcome, but generally we're going from the specific immediate deliverables to the measurable changes. I also want to note another difference here that I know we had some questions on EDRs is this table is supposed to both talk about outputs and outcomes from individual projects and from your portfolio as a whole. So your application for your individual component projects is also going to ask you what outputs and outcomes come from that. Include those most important metrics in this overarching table and include larger overarching metrics that might not make sense attached to any one individual project, but really only make sense when they're working as a whole. Those should also be here. That was a lot. Maybe I'll pause for a second for any questions about this specific table. Okay, seeing none, feel free to put them in the chat, but moving on. Here's some best practices for same section, still talking about outputs and outcomes. These should be one, transformative. So think about where you are now versus where you need to be in 3, then 5, then 10 years. 2, be realistic. Sometimes applications for this kind of funding overpromise, but we will expect you to deliver. And you'll actually report on your progress semi-annually if you do get funded. So we will be doing the sniff test for does this make sense based on the amount of funding you're asking for, the activities you're doing. 3, be defensible. We could always ask you how you arrived at them. So if you're talking about creating however many new jobs or however much money in private income investment, make sure that you have your numbers in your file somewhere in case EDA were to ask you how you came to that metric. Or your output should align logically across projects. So if you say that you're creating metric A at a certain number in one project, that should make sense with another metric for the same measurement in another project, right? It's going to be clear to us if you had completely different authors working on different component projects and they actually are mutually exclusive. So make sure that your metrics align across projects. And then finally, be specific. Put a numeric goal to every metric. I know this is probably not the most fun part of your application, but these outputs and outcomes are the core basis for EDA's funding. The whole reason that EDA would be funding you is to arrive at these outputs and outcomes, so define them carefully and credibly. And then lastly, do want to say that this is definitely it's a lot of work in the application prep, and it's a lot of work if you do get awarded. So you'll probably want to budget staff time for data collection across your projects and data infrastructure management. A lot of our past awardees in similar programs end up procuring software to manage data like this. So it's something you probably want to talk about with your teams before you submit your budgets. Okay, section 7, local or regional strategic vision. And again, we're skipping section 6, talking about that next time. Here, the takeaway is that your proposal should reflect a clear connection to your SEDS or SEDS equivalent plan, demonstrating that the proposal is grounded in existing regional priorities. So 1, explain how the project portfolio aligns with the goals of the region or multi-regional goals and plans. 2, know that a plan that's disconnected from a SEDS, it's probably a red flag for reviewers. It indicates that your key regional partners who are probably involved in the SEDS aren't working towards the same goals that your proposal for disaster is putting forward. So all these things should be aligned. And then finally, explain how the project aligns with EDA's economic recovery priorities. There's more on the NOFO page 14 and 15 for this. Okay, last one. Feasibility. So explain how the portfolio of component projects will be able to succeed. EDA has a lot of history with successful funding portfolios and ones that haven't been so successful or have missed timelines, have asked for more funding. So reviewers will be familiar with what looks like a proposed portfolio that will succeed versus not. Tell us about your organizational capacity, but we'll discuss that next webinar. Tell us about your private sector participation. We'll discuss that next webinar. Give us a realistic project completion timeline. That really just goes back to that outputs and outcomes table. And then finally, this is a new thing. Tell us about your previous experience managing similar grant resources, similar projects, and then what came from those. So basically, and here I'm reading from the tip, hopefully you do get this $20 million. Amazing, celebrate, hooray. Then comes the hard part where you actually have to carry out what you promised. And that's not easy. So in your application, tell us your track record that shows that you can do something like this. Of course, this is basically your conclusion of your overarching narrative. So it's important, seal the deal, make your case for EDA funding airtight.
And here, I think it's important to remember, your track record doesn't only have to be with us. There are other funders out there. There are state funders, there are philanthropic funders. Mention those things. Nothing too small, nothing too big. We just want to make sure that you've got a track record that you've done something similar, or if this is going to be a stretch, like how are you going to mitigate some of those risks? Like that goes into the feasibility piece. But it's hard to do things in the real world. Like application processes are one thing, bringing it to life and doing the implementation. This, it's hard to do. So this is your opportunity to say, all right, these are the things we do well. These might be the things that are stretched, but this is also kind of how we're going to mitigate and think about those. I think those can give readers a lot of confidence that you're being straightforward and reflective about those things. All right. So any questions in the chat? I cannot see the chat at the moment because I'm doing the slides.
Hey,
Grace,
Justin, can I ask
Hey.
you a question? I did address it in the chat, but I think it'd be good to talk about out loud. There was a question about the separate applications. This goes back to the idea of governance and leadership and managing a coalition of projects. There's a question about, do we anticipate the need to have distinct PIs for each of the interrelated component projects, or is one PI for all the projects? Okay. What are your thoughts there?
I think that's a good question. We've seen it done both ways, I think, but there are pros and cons. Hey, it's a lot of money for one. It's a lot of work for one entity to do. We would have some real capacity challenges. The second thing is if one person is doing all the work, then there are some significant questions around partners and making sure that there's a coalition. We've seen it work different ways. There's no hard and fast rule, but remember the name of the game here is partnership and coalitions working together. Just be prepared in your application to tell us why this works for you in your individual context.
I'm going to add something too, Justin. Feel free to speak over
Sure.
me on this one, but typically we see different PIs across component projects. It doesn't mean it has to be that way, but that's typically what we see.
Again, another question we answered in the chat, but probably good to bring up, is if your organization wants to be part of multiple applications within one, I think I'll rephrase it as a two-part question. If they want to lead multiple component projects within one coalition or be part of multiple coalitions, is that allowed? What would that look like?
Yeah, there's nothing that explicitly prohibits that. I think, what if both of your coalitions win and now you have to manage 3 projects in one organization? You should play that out and think about your capacity. So, be careful. You could win both. You could have all of it. But if if that were the case, like there's no hard and fast rule, but you know, there are some feasibility questions to that I think the devil would be in the details there. Good questions. So I'm going to go back to this slide. So again, I think sometimes it's good to, I think one of the things, if I were giving people grant writing advice, is I know sometimes when we, like, this is a lot of work. And I know that when you're doing a project with so many different components, the first thing you do is farm it out to different, like you do section 1 and you do section 3 and you do section 5, right? I think one of the things that, and this is the time to start doing this piece, is making sure that you're bringing those together and making it sound like your application is in one place. These types of grant competitions are way too big for one person to do on their own. You've probably chopped it up and divided it. Make sure this is your opportunity to sort of bring it together and like tell one unified story. I think one of the ways that I would sort of use this sort of flow chart is just maybe bring your core group together, set your application aside, turn it over, and see if you could tell in a very clear, straight line in 2 minutes what you're trying to do. Disaster impacts. This is what happened to us. We quantified it this way. This is our industry. This is why it makes sense to us. Coalition. This is who's at the table. This is what they're going to bring. This is how we're going to work together. This is our proposal. This is what we're going to request and what we're going to do. This is how they work together to lead to transformation. We're building on these investments and policy commitments in our community. This is going to help increase the likelihood of success for our portfolio of projects. And the government should do this because it's transformative in this way. It's going to make this kind of impact in this way. And we're the right team to bring it together because we've been able to do X, Y, and Z. That's what I would be able to convey. And then I would go back to my application and say, did we say that clearly? Have we presented that clearly? Is it sort of coming out to the reader clearly, to different readers? That is how I would sort of use this tool in sort of like thinking about the revision and edits to my respective application. Pause there. Amanda, Grace, any other questions in the chat? And then I'll start showing my face again and I can like do questions. We can answer more questions offline or not offline without the slides.
Yeah, I would just say these are great questions. Feel free to email your EDR if you have any that come after this. And we're going to be really good about FAQs so that we help you put forward the best applications. But yeah, Justin, I think that's it for the chat right now.
Yeah, I see a lot of like really specific questions in here. I think some of those I think are good for everybody. We will inventory these, work together to give more specific answers. Some of these I don't necessarily want to do right off the bat, like for everybody, but we can also get more specific answers to post on FAQs. All of these are really good questions. Any questions like this is your opportunity. Like there are a lot of people on the phone who have read applications. This is I love the question about the table and that's a very practical question. There is no question too big or too small. Like, are there any other questions? Just sort of like, oh gosh, how are we supposed to make that happen? Or what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, Justin, I don't know if you can see this one in the chat. There's a new one about whether for citing things within the 10-page limit, should folks use footnotes at the bottom of the page, or should they use a reference page that can add on to the 10 pages to be an 11th page?
Our hard and fast rule is 10 pages. Do not add an 11th page. The NOFO says don't exceed those things. So that means I would do my footnotes or parenthetical like citation in on that page. I mean, I know that story, I know that 10-page limit. I mean, if we did 12, we'd be having the same conversation, 15 or hyperlinks. Thank you, Dan. That is also a good way to do that. Yes. The, you know, 10 is always, if we said 12, we'd be having the same conversation. The thing is like, be clear, be concise, do the page limit. We get a good number, we get a lot of applications. It's a lot of reading, it's a lot of time, and we want to make sure that one, we're pushing people, we're keeping things consistent across the competition, but then also making sure that we're managing our time effectively and reading these applications. Other things you're nervous about? Asking because I would like to understand if they'll be able to zoom in the event that we have to cram stuff, particular application elements. That'll be impractical. Got it. Oh, so I'm not gonna like go into like the Zoom thing, that piece, but we share these electronically with folks. Sometimes reviewers print them out. I do not when I do mine because like I just read mine over here and put my comments and things that I want to do and annotate on screen because it would be so much paper. But we do not print them out for them. Do we have a font? Do we name a specific font? Amanda, Grace?
I that would be news to me.
I don't think we do.
Nope. Just 11-point font, single space, 1-inch margins. But choose something that is not hard to read. Nothing, no wingdings or whatever it's called.
But yeah, Joel, if you're talking about an image, right, don't count on people being able to zoom in.
I think, yeah, I know that these things are like, we are a federal agency. Sometimes, bureaucracy rules and things, and the rules are very, very important. But I really think like, the things that really make an application less competitive are some of the story, the clarity of your projects, how they're interconnected. Maybe people spending sort of too much time sort of like talking about how their region is unique or spending like that precious 10 pages on like metric after metric to sort of prove the inherent case that you've been harmed by the disaster. Like that is not the best strategy. Remember that go back through that storyboard and make sure that you're hitting those boxes and telling a complete story. All right. Anything in the chat?
Just me, but I'll say out loud the reminders that we will be posting this recording and the slides on the website in the next couple of days. So check back on the disaster supplemental EDA website, which is linked somewhere in the chat. And also, if you have not already, please get in contact with your respective economic development representative, your EDR, if you have any follow-up questions. But we will be also posting FAQs. And it does, and yep, that's it.
So next Thursday, 1 p.m., the link should be out there. If you have specific questions, EDRs know where to find us. We will come back and talk about governance. We will also be talking about more about sort of the logistics of using Edge. Know that all of our resources are online. There's links here, and we will get this posted end of day tomorrow as soon as we can. All right. Appreciate everybody for coming today. Hope this was helpful. If you have feedback, very open to hearing more. We're trying to provide some support to folks in doing a really hard task. And I appreciate you all that you are signing up to do this.